Thank you so much. Thank you to the Baloch Advocacy and Studies Center and also to the Iranian Society at SOAS for organizing this very important event. And thank you so much for having me. And first, congratulations on the launch of the center and also the launch of the 2024 report. I think this kind of report represents the kind of rigorous documentation that makes advocacy possible. So I'm Satow, the UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran. My full-time job is to work as a professor and director of a criminological institute at Birkbeck, University of London. Like all UN Special Rapporteurs, I serve this mandate on a voluntary capacity while balancing with my academic responsibilities. So given these commitments, I rarely have the opportunity to attend events in person, but since SOAS is right next door to Birkbeck, where I work, it's a real honor to be able to be with you in the same room. So thank you again for having me today. I assumed this mandate in August 2024, so it's been almost a year into this position. And during this period, I have observed that the Balochi people of Iran have been systematically marginalized, silenced, and subjected to some of the gravest human rights violations, including the violations to the right to life. The organizers of today's event has asked me to address two issues, one about the right to life and the other about how my thoughts on strengthening advocacy efforts. And I plan to do both things in 15 minutes. So on the right to life, and I apologize in advance that I'll be repeating some of the events, topics already covered by my fellow panelists, but one of the most alarming human rights violations facing the Balochi community is the state's use of the death penalty. My report to the Human Rights Committee Council this year in March documented this reality. While Balochi population comprises approximately, and I say approximately because the census data does not show, we don't provide this, the 2 to 4% of Iran population, but they account for over 10% of total known executions. And I use the word known because, again, the death penalty statistics are not made public. In actual numbers here, it's likely that more than 100 Balochi individuals were executed in 2024. Evidence collected through years of civil society monitoring demonstrates this consistent pattern of Balochi overrepresentation. And I think this alarming trend has continued into 2025. Data compiled by Baloch Activist Campaign shows that at least 76 Balochi individuals were executed between January and June 2025. And the breakdown of those 76 known executions, the vast majority are for drug-related executions. 54 for drug-related offenses, 17 on murder, qisas charges, and 5 on broadly defined national political security offenses. So as you know, the majority of executions affecting the Baloch community are involving drug-related offenses. And based on the individual cases that I have received, these cases are often marked by poverty, undocumented status, and lack of due process protections, including Balochi Farsi interpretation and proper quality legal representations. We've already seen a very sad and heartbreaking video, but I want to offer two illustrative examples of such drug-related executions. A 25-year-old undocumented Balochi man working as a suktbar was executed for possessing heroin and opium totaling 10,000 grams. Due to his undocumented status, he owned no property, yet the court ordered confiscation of the house he rented and the vehicle he used to transport fuel. The second example, a 24-year-old unemployed Balochi man was executed for possessing methamphetamine and heroin totaling 3,700 grams. Having no movable or immovable property, no confiscation order was issued, but he was fined 95 million tomans, a sum that remains unpaid due to his family's poverty. And I just want to highlight the confiscation orders because this is important in relation to the current drug law that's been amended. And I'll come back to this later on. So in sum, the death penalty for drug offenses as carried out punishes the poor and further impoverishes families. And one point which was already mentioned by my fellow panelists, but what I found in reading the Centre's new 2024 report is that execution of Balochi prisoners occurred across 12 provinces, and I thought that the report again makes an important point that when prisoners are detained far from their homes, it severely limits family access, and that for families already living in poverty, visiting imprisoned relatives becomes financially impossible. Now, beyond the death penalty, but sticking to the right to life, I continue to receive reports of extrajudicial killings by border forces in Sistan and Balochistán province. Between January and November 2024, Iranian border officials killed at least 2,016 Balochi fuel carriers and wounded 129 at least. These deaths highlight the deadly risks faced by marginalized communities engaged in cross-border trade for economic survival. And here I want to stress the absence of, again, official data on these incidents, and that investigations into such deaths are infrequently conducted, if any. And under international law, lethal force must be employed only as a last resort and solely to protect life or prevent serious injuries from imminent threats. And I take the view that when a state kills its own citizens arbitrarily, it reveals much deeper systemic problems. These killings can't be examined in isolation, and I think it's important that we look at how violations across civil, political, social, cultural, and economic rights are interconnected and reinforce each other, creating the conditions where lethal violence become a tragic final outcome and often legitimized. Sistan and Balochistán province in Iran is the most impoverished region, and according to the government statistical center of Iran, 62% of the population in this province lives below the poverty line. And this is here I'm quoting the official figures, so the reality with undocumented people could be significantly higher. I think this economic deprivation needs to be understood in the context of laws, policies, practices in place that discriminate Iran's Baloch people. And you're probably already familiar with everything that I am about to say, but I just want to highlight some of the violations that I receive on a regular basis. Restrictions on the use of the Balochi language, on publishing and public communication, children denied education in their mother tongue, Sunni Balochis face religious freedom limitations. I also want to flag environmental degradation, which compounds these violations. Residents face extreme floods and droughts that severely affect local livelihoods, leading to displacement and health crisis. And these environmental issues stemming from unsustainable resource exploitation combined with climate change disproportionately impact minority populated areas and disrupting the traditional ways of life and worsening economic social challenges. I think finally a significant challenge concerns access to birth certificates and other official documentations. And historical administrative circumstances have resulted in limited availability of birth certificates and other forms of identification. And I believe there are also concerns more recently within the Balochi community regarding the potential for undocumented Iranian Balochis to be inadvertently categorized as foreigners, which could lead to complications regarding their residential status and, in worst case scenario, deportation. Despite facing such oppression and the threat of statelessness within their homeland, Balochi people demonstrate remarkable humility. I've recently received reports of even while confronting poverty and marginalization, young Balochis have responded to Afghanistan's refugee crisis with profound dignity, using their own resources to provide food, water, and essential supplies to Afghan families at various camps. On this note, I want to turn my attention to my thoughts on advocacy. The situation of Iran's Balochi people demands coordinated action, and upon taking up my mandate, I established 3 priority areas that I would like to continue to examine throughout my mandate, and that is the right to life, transparency on data, and gender and intersectional analysis. And I believe these three priorities also provide strategic framework for advocacy for Baloch community. So in more concrete terms, first, I think it will be important to address the advocacy gap around drug-related executions. During my 12 months in this mandate, I have observed, based on requests, submissions, communications for requests that I receive, executions of political prisoners receive significant attention, and I'm not criticizing that fact, quite rightly so. But those facing executions for drug-related offenses are often overlooked as a result, and this gap affects the entire Iran human rights movement. Yet, drug executions disproportionately affect the Balochi people, and I think this is an important advocacy point. From what I can do as Special Rapporteur, I had initially planned to focus my General Assembly report this year, towards the end of this year, on drug-related executions and human rights. But I've decided to defer this work to next year's Human Rights Council, likely to happen in March. So I will be focusing on this, and the call for input on my page is already available on my website, and I strongly encourage you to make submissions. The timing is crucial in my view because of Iran's anti-narcotics law, which was revised back in 2017, is currently being amended. Please, if you do go to the website, please ignore the deadline because it looks as though it's passed, but I will be amending that deadline in time for the next year's Human Rights Council. Second, on advocacy, I think it's important to demand transparency on data. In my view, lack of transparency represents one of the most fundamental obstacles to accountability. If we're talking just on the death penalty, states wielding the power to impose death sentences have corresponding obligation to demonstrate transparency and accountability. When a state holds the power to take away life, that authority must be balanced with the public's right to know the circumstances under which such power is exercised. I have made specific recommendations calling on the Islamic Republic of Iran to make publicly available data disaggregated by sex, age, nationality, and ethnicity on a death penalty, and also to collect and to publish reliable statistics on ethnic demographic composition. The absence of official population data forces us to operate with estimates. And we are currently having to use geographical distribution of residents across various regions to estimate the population of ethnic groups. In my view, the burden lies with the state to provide data if it wishes to refute the assessment of discriminatory practices. Next, on my point on advocacy, I think it's important to prioritize the intersectional rights of Balochi women and girls. Official figures show that Sistan and Balochistán has Iran's highest rate of female illiteracy at 21%, which is 8 percentage points above the national average, and also the highest unemployment rate for women. My recent Human Rights Council report examined gendered dimensions of Iran's violations, analyzing how legal frameworks limit women's lives from birth, marriage, and divorce, access to justice. The report also examined femicides, honor-related killings. That said, I think I need to acknowledge that my report would have benefited from a much more detailed intersectional lens, particularly regarding Balochi women and girls. And this would have highlighted how national patterns of discrimination are compounded by ethnic marginalization, creating multiple intersecting barriers to their fundamental justice and rights. And finally, on advocacy, and you may all be doing this already, but I think it's important to strengthen networks and collaboration. And I hope that further collaboration, perhaps with other ethnic and religious minority organizations, may be a great advocacy strategy. Or even on the thematics, given that drug-related executions significantly affect Balochi people, it may be beneficial to consider collaborating with organizations working on drug policy and human rights like Harm Reduction International or the International Drug Policy Consortium, which could amplify advocacy efforts within broader and global campaigns against the death penalty for drug offenses. I'll stop here, but thank you again for the organizers for inviting me and for me having this platform. Thank you so much.